Alaska. And in doing so, we'll pass through some of the most beautiful country in the western United States and Canada there is. The length of the trip was approximately 3 months, and in miles, the length of the trip was approximately 12,000, almost 1,000 of which was by the Alaskan Marine Highway or ferry system. My wife Brenda and I, and our two sons, Bill 13 and Matt 5, made this trip in 1978. For most anyone who loves the outdoors, and especially fishing and hunting, dream of a trip to the Northwest and Alaska, and I am no exception. For after much letter writing to get hunting guides lined up, and much preparation in the way of packing clothes, food, hunting gear, and film, we finally were ready to leave on August 6th. We started for Alaska by way of Wyoming and Montana, and we traveled through Alaska, through Alberta, British Columbia, and the Yukon to hunt the snow-white Dall sheep of Alaska and the giant brown bears of the beautiful coves in southeastern Alaska. His mother-in-law. However, upon close examination, it's a mummified Indian found in the Cody area. Inside the museum is many artifacts of Indian and past pioneer days. Some of the intricate beadwork is in this saddle, each bead a different color. Many of the squaws' Indian garb and tribal dance costumes are made of beadwork and skins. The museum itself is a very beautiful building, being fairly new. It's about 10 years old. These are some of the costumes the Braves would wear in a similar festive. Also in the museum, many paintings are on display. These are of Charles Russell, who was an early pioneer artist, and he painted pictures only of landscape and the animal wildlife in early pioneer days. They are very lifelike, and you almost feel like you're part of the picture. These are beaver pelts stretched on a traditional pioneer frame. This is Buffalo Bill's boyhood home, which was moved to a location next to the new museum. And on we go, northwest toward Alaska, and headed right now toward Yellowstone Park. This is the Boysen Reservoir. The highway passes along many deep canyons, beautiful lakes, and through tunnels through solid rock. This 50 miles of Yellowstone Park is sometimes referred to as the most scenic 50 miles in America. And once inside the park, there's many beautiful sights to see, both the wildlife and the beautiful scenery. Although the time is early August, high in the mountain passes, the weather is cool with very little humidity, which makes for very comfortable camping. Also, even though it's August, there's snow patches left in the high mountain passes, and from time to time one can see mountain sheep with binoculars in the mountains. This is Yellowstone Lake, a very beautiful body of water. This is Yellowstone Lodge, located in the Geyser Basin. In the basin itself, there's many clear, hot pools of water and many cool, both cool and hot running streams with many minerals and different colored elements in the ground. There's wooden boardwalks constructed throughout the area for the safety of the people who like to walk through them. Yellowstone Lodge, again, is the largest building in the world, constructed solely of whole logs, has beautiful masonry work inside, combined with, again, the whole log structure of early pioneer days. It's a great honeymoon resort. This is Old Faithful getting ready for an eruption, and it starts out as a whisper and ends up as a giant roar. On again, leaving Yellowstone Park and heading north toward Canada, we cross over into Canada just north of Glacier Park and into the Canadian Rockies. The following sequence of films will be taken around Bow Lake and Bow Glacier. Very beautiful scenery. When we were way back in Ohio, I was writing a guide, and I made arrangements with a guide by the name of Lloyd Anderson in Delta Junction, Alaska, to take me sheep hunting. However, about 2 weeks before I left to go, I was notified by mail that he had been killed in a plane crash, so at the last minute, I was forced to make arrangements with another guide for the sheep hunt. Wildlife is abundant in all the Canadian Rockies. There's mountain sheep and goats in certain areas. The streams, most streams are very clear and have abundant fish. However, some of the streams that are from a glacier are very silty and have a greenish milky cast to them and are devoid of any fish life. This is a cow elk that came out along the highway to get some of the tender grass that grows there. Very beautiful animal. Most of these slides were taken very close to Bath Park, which is a park similar to Yellowstone. However, it's about twice the size of Yellowstone Park. The trees just seem to go on like one huge dark green, almost black mat of velvet on the mountains. This particular period of time that we were taking these pictures and passing through this area was not the best for picture taking. It was mostly very overcast, and it did rain on us from time to time. Building highways through this part of the country would be very expensive and time consuming due to the nature of the landscape and the rocks that sometimes have to be carved. There's beautiful mountain streams almost everywhere you look. This is a small town of Golden, which at one time was one of the main steamboat ports, and the paddle wheelers would come there, and one of the first trading posts in the area was set up here at Golden in the days of the early 1900s. This area is also has quite a mining industry and tradition. While passing through this area, we made a wrong turn and got somewhat lost and made a half-a-day detour to get back on the right track. But everything here is so beautiful that one never gets tired of looking or just stopping along the road to take in the beautiful waterfalls. Again, we're entering Yoho National Park, which is just south of Jasper Park in the Canadian Rockies. This is the small town of Jasper. This is one of the glaciers as we're entering the Columbia ice fields. The Columbia ice fields is a portion of the Northwest that for the most part stays frozen all the time. Only the top few inches of soil thaw during the very warmest months of the year. And for the most part, the weather is considerably cooler than it is further south. Again, the overcast skies stayed with us, and it wasn't the best conditions to take pictures. This is Bow Lake and Bow Glacier in the background, and the immediate area surrounding Bow Lake was very beautiful indeed. This is Bow Lake Lodge in the background. The orange building had a small dirt road back to it, was nestled in a very deep valley. That's Bow Glacier again with a stream to the left. The next picture is the same picture through a telephoto lens, bringing it up very close. And again, the enormous size can only be appreciated by being there. Most of the stop signs say stop in American and stop also in French, due to there being a large number of French-speaking people this far north in Canada. Some of the peaks seem to almost reach far into the sky, to where they're almost untouchable. Huge spires and solid rock pinnacles add to the beauty of the Canadian Northwest. It's no wonder there's been so many legends come out of the mountains. This is some of the most spectacular scenery that I've ever seen. Many times the only way they can get a road through the mountains is to follow the path that was already worn by a river, a fast-running river. And many times a road and a railroad tracks will follow a river through the mountains. In the mountains there are several fast-running streams and waterfalls that make for fantastic beauty. Here's quite a large glacier. There are places where they have tours that take you out on the glacier either by snowmobile or specially made bus. And sometimes the size of the glacier can only be appreciated by going right down to the glacier. And many times, as this one here, you can drive right down to the foot of the glacier as you see the bus and the cars parked in front of the glacier. The wind usually blows fairly steady up here, and you can hear many times the wind howling at night when he's camping up here. Here we see the city of Jasper in the middle of Jasper Park. We took a ride on a tramway to the top of the mountain and took several photographs of the surrounding area. And the beautiful miles and miles of nothing but lakes and streams and mountains is almost fantastic. Again, the town of Jasper. When we came down the tramway, there was a bear in the parking lot, and he had a lunch going out of a garbage can, and some tourists were taking pictures and almost running back into the woods. But then the bear come back out, and a bus driver of a tourist bus attempted again to chase the bear away from the garbage can, but the bear came closer and closer, and this encounter ended with the bear chasing the bus driver back to the bus, to everybody's delight. And a short time later, some rangers came up and safely moved the bear to another location. This is one of the campgrounds that we stayed at close to Jasper, with some very beautiful scenery around it, and the government furnished firewood and so on. And on to British Columbia, and again closer and closer to our destination, Alaska. Here we're coming into Prince George, British Columbia, which is a town of about 15,000, and sometimes referred to as the spruce capital of the world because of the tremendous logging industry there. This bridge was one way on one side of the bridge and one way on the other, with the train tracks in the middle, and was raised and lowered by the large gears on the left, which were made of wood. And on past Prince George, again north toward Dawson Creek, British Columbia. There was a short stretch of road that they had just gravelled in preparation for resurfacing it, but it was not much inconvenience. It was a little dusty, but had we known how the highway was going to be, we would have appreciated the dusty part. Here we're coming into Dawson Creek, British Columbia, which is the official start of the Alaskan Highway. The road is paved for approximately 50 or 60 miles north of Dawson Creek, and then it turns to graded dirt and mud. As we passed through there, it sprinkled rain on us for several hours and made the road very muddy. And after a few miles on the highway, you could almost not see the color of our truck or our camper. The windows on the camper became very clogged with mud to where you had to use the lights in the daytime. And you couldn't use any of the locks on the camper doors or anything because they were rendered inoperable because of the mud. And there were places where the graders actually had to pull cars pulling campers through the mud so they could go on their own, and there were places we wouldn't have made it through had we not had four-wheel drive. They fixed the garbage can in this fashion to attempt to keep the bears from tipping them over and spilling garbage about. And here we're entering the Yukon, which is famous in legend and history as gold mining. Here is the Sign Forest close to Prince George, where people passing by leave remembrance of their passing from what village or town they're from, and we're the same as anyone else. We made a makeshift cardboard sign and left our token there. On to Whitehorse, Yukon, which is a very famous, legendary city. That's where all the gold rush people came. And the log skyscrapers of the past mixed with the very modern office building of the present-day Whitehorse, a town of about 15,000 people. Travel further north in the Yukon, and we entered the Kaluni Game Sanctuary, which is several hundred square miles set aside for the purpose of preserving the wildlife and the beauty of the country. This is beautiful Kaluni Lake, which has abundant fish and wildlife, and here we was watching mountain goats on the far mountain. All during the trip, it was not unusual at all to either see mountain sheep or mountain goats in the mountains. And sometimes we stopped early in the afternoon close to a stream where we could fish for a short period of time. The fishing is fantastic. Anyone who likes to fish at all could really be enthused over just the fishing alone. Here at Destruction Bay is just more or less a wide spot in the Alaskan Highway, and we stopped here one afternoon next to the lake to have lunch. Very beautiful scenery indeed. Here we are in Alaska. Everyone was relieved on the blacktop, and after having our picture taken by the sign, walking back to the camper, and lo and behold, a flat tire. More problems. And then on further into Alaska at Tok, Alaska, we stayed at this small campground that had an old-time trapper's cabin with a sod roof. And then south-westerly direction, after we went through Tok, toward Anchorage, Alaska. These are fireweed. Sometimes we've seen whole valleys of this same fireweed. A very beautiful sight. And again, on into Alaska, the cloudy weather just seemed to hang with us, and we had to make the best of it, being rained on periodically. This is a glacier way back in the farm. It's called Menindal Glacier. and the many, many square miles of forest and beautiful mountain trees. And here we are arriving in Anchorage after 4,200 miles. At a large mall in Anchorage, there's a large brown bear display. This brown bear was killed in 1977 and ranks number 57 in the record books for brown bears. This is a wildlife display in the lobby of the Anchorage International Airport. All these animals are native to Alaska, and it was very, very interesting. Here I left on my flight to McGrath, a small airport where I was to be picked up by a bush pilot in an airplane. Here we see Mount McKinley far away, and this is a little closer to a telephoto lens. There's two peaks in Alaska, both the highest peaks on the continent. One, Mount McKinley, named after President McKinley, who was from Ohio, and the other is called Churchill Peak. And that's Mount McKinley on the right, Churchill Peak on the left. Mount McKinley being 20,300 feet, Churchill Peak being about 19,000. Here we're flying through the pass over to McGrath. This is a commercial airline, and we're going on now and going to land at McGrath. I had to sign a statement saying that I thought the flight was safe. One of the passengers complained that we flew too low through a pass, and the pilot asked me to make a written statement here in this office of the airlines, which we see now. On into sheep country. Here we're hunting the Dall sheep and walking up a stream, climbing higher into the mountains. These sheep here were just ewes and lambs, and we tried not to spook them because we was after a large ram. This is looking down toward the bottom, the creek we came up, and my assistant guide that I hunted with on this trip. Some of the peaks looked almost black, as if they were made of coal. And again, some of the Dall sheep. I was very fortunate in killing a full curl ram, a beautiful specimen. However, I was very unfortunate in the fact that after he was shot, he tumbled 1,000 feet or more down some cliff rock and ended in a shale slide, to which we were unable to locate him the first day, and after finding him the second day, all I was able to salvage from the whole sheep was one horn. So I had nothing to be mounted, and really kind of at a loss. But that's all part of the hunting game, and one has to expect disappointments at times. This is the hunting camp itself, the sheep camp. They're tents stretched over wooden frames, and here we stayed for about 8 days, 7 or 8 days, in a beautiful country. It's just almost like a dream come true for me. The weather was very comfortable in the 70s in the daytime. We hunted in our t-shirts several days, and this is the inside the cook tent where we had our meals and where the two guides slept. The tents every year are damaged somewhat from bears and have to be patched up with plastic or canvas for the upcoming hunting season. While we was in this camp, we seen several very large moose, and after I got home, the guide wrote me a letter and informed me that they had killed 2 moose out of the same camp where we was hunting sheep that went into the Boone and Crockett record book. This is the main lodge where the guide keeps on Farewell Lake. This is where he ferries all the hunters in and out of to the various hunting camps for sheep and moose, goat, and so on. And 2 years ago, or 2 years before I was there, which would be 76, the number 2 grizzly bear in the record books was killed crossing this lake right in front of the main lodge building. This is beautiful Farewell Lake. There's very large lake trout in here. The lake is approximately 3 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. And from time to time, an abundance of wildlife visit the lake to water. And these are some of the small cabins that surround the main lodge where the guests stay for the short period of time they're there, as they're being ferried in and out to all the various hunting camps in the area for all different species of wildlife. Some of the cabins are newer and modern, more modern than others. This is the wash house. They have a laundry there. Everything is heated, all the hot water is heated by propane. This lodge was once owned by the governor of Alaska before the present owner, Stan Frost, bought it. In the wintertime, they fly airplane fuel in here in a DC-7 in 50-gallon drums, sometimes 3,000 or more gallons, to stash for the hunting season. One of the guides, assistant guides, stay here during the winter to oversee the lodge. And this is the oldest building at the main lodge. It's where the guides stay between hunting trips during the hunting season. One of the older fellas there, a German fella, took the canoe out with a sail on it, and a little bit later on he had the misfortune of tipping the canoe over and got a very cold bath in the lake. One of the assistant guides here is quite a gardener and takes quite a bit of pride in his gardening ability, and raises some pretty fair potatoes. This is a stash where they keep their gardening supplies and meat and so on from the animals. And after the German fella turned the canoe over, someone had to go out and rescue him from his cold bath and tow him back in. And these are some of the guests around the main lodge at the time. Many times a fellow will go hunting off to one of the camps and make arrangements for his wife to stay at the main lodge, where the master guide's wife, Marta Frost, and her daughters do the cooking and make the guests as comfortable as possible. These are some slides from inside the main lodge, which is also a building constructed of logs, and the different pelts, and the master guide Stan Frost and his wife Marta. Stan has many trophies himself over the years he's hunted in Alaska, and it's a very attractive lodge. This is also around the main lodge, and some of the vehicles that Stan has. This is a four-wheel drive that they're used there. And Stan has 2 Super Cubs and 1 Cessna airplane for a little longer trips. And there's 2 runways at the main lodge, one a short dirt runway and the other is also dirt but a little longer. Here we're traveling south of Anchorage toward Portage Glacier and some of the mountain streams and so on. This was just at the end of the red salmon spawning season. The red salmon was just finishing spawning here, and there wasn't too many in the stream, just a few here and there, just enough to make the trip we was on interesting. Because we were headed for here, the beautiful Kenai River in Soldotna, Alaska. They have quite a gravel bar there, and we just pulled the camper down the gravel bar and camped about 50 feet from the river and fished at our convenience. There, Brenda's got one on. Come on, Brenda. I know you can do it. Bring him in there. Well, Matthew's helping there by watching. There it is. That looks like a pretty good fish. Don't get nervous now. Don't lose him. Yeah, just a little more. You almost got him in there. Okay. Come on now. I know you can do it. There, Brenda. I know you could do it, Brenda. There, she brought in that beautiful pink salmon. While we was at this location, she canned 40 quarts of salmon in about 3 days and had plenty of salmon to eat and carry on. One of the most beautiful spots we were at. It's a very swift-flowing river, the Kenai. There, Matthew. Now he's got one on. Evening Christmas, everybody's catching fish. Hey, I hope that fish don't pull him. There, you got it. By George, you got it right in there. And he got another nice fish. There, Billy. Billy, my goodness, everybody's catching fish. All you have to do is just throw your line in the water, I guess. And he come up with a fish. That's a dandy. That's a male fish there called the humpy. Come on, Bill, that fish wasn't that big. Just like a fisherman. Would you look at that? The eggs from the females to try and cure them for bait for the silver salmon, which is the next larger salmon. After putting borax on them, they become similar to plastic, are not sticky and hard to handle. This is the area we camped at there on the Kenai, and the city of Soldotna kept garbage cans there and so on for refuge. Really a beautiful place, one of the nicest places we were at. After leaving Soldotna and the fishing, we travel back north toward Anchorage after this little side trip of fishing, which was very productive. And we travel back up the Glen Highway toward Anchorage and some of the beautiful sights we see there. This is glacier country, and right next to the ocean, some of the warmer currents. The weather is really not as severe as a lot of people might imagine. But every direction you look, there's a beautiful sight. This is traveling back up the Lynn Highway and looking across the Lynn Canal just south of Anchorage. And the tide up here is quite changeable. Wow. Also, while in Alaska, we had a chance to go to the Alaska State Fair, which is in Palmer, Alaska, and view huge vegetables grown in the Matanuska Valley during the summertime in almost 24 hours of daylight. The vegetables attain a huge size, with cabbages to 65 pounds and turnips sometimes to 25 pounds, and beautiful berries. All the vegetables are nice looking. And here's got some beautiful carrots, and this is something that some of the agricultural minded people here. Also in the fertile valley soil, they grow some real nice looking potatoes. All in all, at the fair, they had quite a display of vegetables, and had in the center of the fairground was a beautiful flower garden, which one might not expect in a cooler climate of Alaska. The flowers, but the ones that were there were very beautiful. And as every fair has, they had their rodeo. They also had quite a display of old airplanes that had been restored, and some of the airplanes had played a distant part in the Alaska scene, as that's about one of the only ways of getting around in most of Alaska due to there being almost no roads. Some of the newer aircraft and some of the older aircraft that we used in pioneer days, and even today, a lot of the rescue operations and so on is done by airplane and helicopter. They had an old Alaskan train set up there that was used as a museum and had some of the older equipment and tools that they used in the early days of Alaska in building the railroad, and some of the old coaches, pot-bellied stove for heat. All in all, it's a very interesting display. Palmer, Alaska, the site of the state fair, is nestled in the Wrangell Mountains in a deep valley, and every direction you look, there's mountains. Here we were going back to the airport to make arrangements to go caribou hunting and chartering a plane, and to come across this airplane that tried to take the top off the little building at the left and crashed. There were 3 people in the plane, none of which were injured, and the plane did catch fire. Then on to Elmendorf Air Force Base, where we see this wildlife display of many of the different animals that's native to Alaska. Elmendorf is the largest Air Force base in Alaska and is located 3 or 4 miles just north of Anchorage. Also, while in Alaska and being interested in building, we took a little ride to what was called Mountain View Subdivision, where there was quite an assortment of very beautiful homes. And this is from the subdivision overlooking Anchorage, Alaska in the far distance. Many of the even newer houses have sod roofs, like the ranch house at the bottom of the screen. And they use quite a bit of glass, which surprised me in the building industry there. It seemed that glass would be quite a bit of heat loss, but apparently it's not so severe that the heat loss that they can't use glass. Sometimes almost a third of the house was made of glass in the front. This was somewhat of a driveway, that a very beautiful house at the end, and all laid up in stone walls on the side. It was very elite part of Anchorage. Anchorage has quite a few people, the largest city. It has 200,000 people. While in Anchorage, I rode with one of the police officers for a night of duty. Here we're leaving to go caribou hunting. My son and I flew 300 miles back on the Alaska Peninsula to go caribou hunting, and we was told at this point, a fellow come over and maintained we had water in the gas on our plane, and I told my wife that if we shouldn't come back to really check into things. And here we go, we're flying over the Lynn Canal and see the oil derricks. As I said before, here in Alaska, they fly through the mountains rather than over them, right next to the glaciers. This sequence of pictures was taken from the airplane of the many glaciers and some of the very rugged country. It's no wonder that when they do take and lose an airplane in Alaska, that sometimes the people are never found. And then we came into the small little lake, which was to be our home for supposedly a week. And we've seen much wildlife around there. Here we was caribou hunting. And Billy and I spent 8 days there. It was supposed to be 8 days. It turned out to be 12 because the weather turned bad and they were unable to come back to get us on time. And when they did finally come back 5 days later, we were down to eating peanut butter sandwiches, and we had 1 can of Spam left between us. So I even managed to get Billy to do dishes while I was there in the lake. And this beautiful lake in front of us was abundant with fish. This is typical caribou country, taken from one of the high hillsides surrounding the tent. And we've seen many caribou while we were there. And we shot a little bull on the last day. It's a big job to try and walk a caribou down because they just seem like they glide over the ground, and the tundra is spongy. It's similar to walking on a big sponge, and it's quite tiring. Even in the high mountain, there's flower life there. These beautiful red flowers and yellow flowers seem to be growing almost on solid rock. This is the little caribou we shot. We had him all made into Polish sausage, which was just fantastic eating. And then again, the lake right in front of our camp. One morning we woke up and seen a grizzly bear swimming across the lake here. And when he got across and come out on the land, I was really surprised at the fantastic size that he was. And then after getting back, beautiful moonlit night. Billy found an old caribou horn and was persistent in bringing it home as a souvenir. This was one of the most peaceful valleys and one of the most peaceful weeks I've ever experienced. We just hunted and fished and laid around, and when you look across, it makes you feel very insignificant as far as being important. This is where the weather turned bad. We had to tie a nylon cord on the tent to keep the wind from blowing the tent down, and the clouds is the reason that they couldn't get back in to get us, and it misted rain quite often. And it cleared up for a day or so, and Bill and I'd go hiking, and we just had a fantastic time. We actually got kind of worried toward the end. We sure wanted to get out of there. And when the airplane did come, it came through the mountains rather than over the clouds. It come right through the mountains, right between the peaks, and it was sure a happy day for us. The airplane came to get us. We were taking off, getting ready to go back to Alaska and see Brenda and Matthew. Billy going in and coming out, but even with that sad experience there, he really enjoyed it. And I think Billy did a lot of growing up on this trip. He really experienced the outdoors in the way that it should be. And man just doesn't feel near so important. This is coming back into Anchorage, and this is a view of downtown Anchorage as seen from the airplane. And back to Anchorage we come, and glad to be home again. On the way back to the campgrounds from the airport, we ran across it up and got ready to go north again toward Mount McKinley to visit McKinley Park. This is beautiful Wasilla Lake, where they're going to move the capital of Alaska eventually. And at the end of the road there is a famous Mount McKinley. Mount McKinley can be seen for over 100 miles before you get to it, as we are here. It's over 100 miles away. And some of the best picture taking is of Mount McKinley before you actually get to the park. This sequence of films is taken from the same place, and this next slide is through a telephoto lens, which is probably the best picture of Mount McKinley I have. 20,300 feet of mountain, one of the wonders of the world. And on toward Mount McKinley Park we'll travel. We stayed at the campground just outside the entrance to the park for a few days, and being this late in the year, there was very few tourists in the park. We could just about go anywhere we wanted without being in a crowd, which suited us just fine. Beautiful scenery in almost any direction you look. One of the peaks next to Mount McKinley is the second highest peak on the North American continent, the Churchill Peak. It is 19,000 and some feet high. And here we enter Mount McKinley National Park. Even the day that we were actually in the park was a little cloudy. And this is McKinley Lodge, where they still have railroad service from Anchorage and Fairbanks both. And the tourists come and stay at McKinley Lodge. And as we enter the park, an old cow moose walked out toward us. I would say that the moose, there's probably more moose in McKinley Park as any type of wildlife. We've seen many, along with bears and Dall sheep, caribou. There were really some nice caribou there. Of course, I guess that's typical. It seems like always the best animals and the best trophies are in the parks where they know they're safe. I can't say that I blame them much. Here's a typical barren ground grizzly. It was a medium-sized bear. Not a real trophy, but big enough to give you a lot of problems if he decided to. And again, the beautiful mountains of Mount McKinley. The road in Mount McKinley is 85 miles long, and it's just one way in and again one way out. And it goes to the base of Mount McKinley to a little lake called Wonder Lake. And we went as far as 20 miles from Mount McKinley, and then we turned around and went back. We stayed in the McKinley Park a whole day, and of course, when you're sightseeing, you don't travel fast, and the scenery is so breathtaking. Again, that's Mount McKinley, as seen from the visitor center, 20 miles distance. This is at the visitor center. This is the extent of our journey into Mount McKinley. We went in about 65 miles on a road, on this road here. 65 miles in and 65 miles back, and we didn't get back to our campgrounds till quite a bit after dark. And here's the three bears in the middle of the screen there, and there's another bear there in the middle of the screen, quite a distance away. Here's a black bear and a cub. We're down along the road. And a band of Dall sheep far away. This is through a telephoto lens. They were up on the side of a huge shale slide. Again, this is on the way back out of the park in the late afternoon. Very beautiful animal, the Dall sheep. There's approximately 80,000 Dall sheep in Alaska. It's one of the last great strongholds of the Dall sheep, and will be for quite some time. After leaving Mount McKinley Park, we went further north again toward Fairbanks, which is the northernmost large city in Alaska. And you can tell that the autumn colors have really transpired up in the northern climate. They have a little display there where President Harding drove the Golden Spike to connect the railway from the north and the south. Halfway between Fairbanks and Anchorage. They have a little town and visitor center set up there to represent the early days of Alaska and the early days of Fairbanks, how Fairbanks might possibly have looked at the turn of the century. And Fairbanks is also the official end of the Alaskan Highway. All 1,525 miles from Dawson Creek, British Columbia. They have a co-op there, an Alaskan museum, Eskimo museum, and gift shop, and we found many handmade gifts in the gift shop, which was one of the more reasonably priced places we shopped in Alaska. My wife kept quite a log on the trip to Alaska, and at one time she had written in the log she paid $1.49 for 2 onions because we wanted onions for our hamburgers. And then around Fairbanks they ship all the fresh milk in by plane from Seattle, Washington. This is the Alaska Pipeline where it crosses the Tanana River south of Fairbanks. Quite a project. The pipeline follows the road from Fairbanks to Valdez, Alaska, where the oil is picked up by oil tanker and transported to the lower 48 states. At one time, we had to pay $2.89 for a half a gallon of milk that we used for a home base for our side trips of fishing and sightseeing. This is the downtown area. We stopped down here to the ferry office to pick up our ferry ticket. Also downtown in the bar area, almost any time of day or night, the bars never close, and there's always Indians sitting on the sidewalk in this one area that's had too much to drink, and quite a sight. Typical big metropolitan city. This is the small town of Palmer again as we pass through and headed back now toward Haines, Alaska, 800 miles away to catch the ferry to go on to Sitka and our proposed date for a bear hunt.